Arctic winds have a way of burying secrets deeper than the dead. In February 1944, a British convoy known only as Operation Iceveil left Murmansk under blackout orders, carrying what the Admiralty later called classified engineering materials. Within 48 hours, every vessel disappeared from Allied tracking, leaving behind no distress calls, no debris, and no survivors. For decades, the incident was buried under naval archives marked "lost in action, hostile conditions." But newly declassified intercepts and a handful of erased telegrams hint at something far more deliberate, something Britain moved under the polar night that was never meant to surface again. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iceveil. The Arctic convoys of World War II were some of the most perilous undertakings of the Allied naval campaign. Between 1941 and 1945, British and American ships braved German U-boats, Luftwaffe raids, and the merciless ice fields of the Barents Sea to deliver critical supplies to the Soviet front. But among these documented convoys, one mission has remained conspicuously absent from official lists. Known only by its code name, Operation Iceveil, it departed from Murmansk on February 17, 1944, bound for Spitsbergen under cover of a polar storm. Its existence was first hinted at in a single logbook entry from HMS Valiant, a Royal Navy destroyer that served briefly as part of the Arctic escort flotilla. The entry, dated February 16th, reads simply, "Orders received. Iceveil departs at 600. Special cargo secured. Absolute radio silence." The convoy reportedly consisted of 5 merchant vessels and 2 destroyer escorts. None of them were ever seen again. Official post-war summaries claimed they succumbed to ice and weather, a fate tragically common in the Barents. Yet the temperature data, recovered decades later, contradicts this narrative. No storms were recorded in the sector that week, nor did the German Kriegsmarine register any submarine attacks or aerial operations within that range. For the men of the Royal Navy, it was as if the convoy had sailed off the map. The story might have ended there, another ghost of the Arctic, were it not for a declassified memorandum discovered in 1986 at the Public Record Office in Kew. The document, signed by a Commander H. Elmsworth of Naval Intelligence, referenced an urgent matter concerning Iceveil cargo Omega. Omega was underlined twice, its meaning never clarified. The file was stamped, "Recalled by order of the Ministry of Defense 1947. Curiously, the recall date coincided with a major review of wartime scientific operations, among them several involving radar prototypes, magnetic field research, and weaponized cryogenics. Local fishermen from the Murmansk region later recalled rumors that winter of British ships that carried no flags, loading in silence under armed guard. One man, now long deceased, claimed he saw steel crates stenciled with both the Union Jack and the double-headed eagle of Russia, an impossible pairing given the period's protocols. He was later interrogated by NKVD officials, and his testimony removed from Soviet regional records. In 1959, a Soviet icebreaker crew navigating north of the Barents Shelf reported sonar anomalies beneath the pack ice, rectilinear echoes suggesting artificial structures. Soviet Naval Command dismissed the report as equipment malfunction. Yet when British researchers revisited the site in 1977 using the HMS Endurance, they recorded nearly identical sonar readings. The captain's private journal noted, "Impossible formations below 500 meters, metallic, resonance patterns suggest containment chambers." That page, too, was missing from the official expedition report. When questioned years later, a retired British signals officer, Lieutenant Peter Harwood, revealed that his unit intercepted a fragmentary transmission on February 18, 1944, roughly 36 hours after Iceveil's departure. It consisted of 4 words repeated 3 times: "Package Omega compromised." "Containment failing." The signal abruptly terminated, replaced by an indecipherable burst of static. Harwood claimed he filed a report through standard channels, but the file was later expunged from the Admiralty Index. "That was the last time I ever heard the name Iceveil," he said. After that, even the mention of it made the room go quiet. Historians have attempted to cross-reference Iceveil with other covert operations from that period, but no corresponding designations exist. One intriguing lead comes from a 1943 meeting of the Allied Scientific Liaison Committee in Ottawa, which discussed joint Anglo-Soviet research into geophysical magnetic resonance. The meeting minutes were heavily redacted, but a marginal note refers to transfer of experimental cores to Arctic Convoy QP-22B. That convoy, according to surviving naval logs, was never launched. Some believe Iceveil was the true designation for QP-22B, a cover mission designed to move classified materials of non-conventional origin. Adding to the mystery are photographs discovered in the archives of the Imperial War Museum, London. One, dated February 1944, shows dock workers loading a crate onto a merchant ship identified as SS Brackenfield. The crate bears an unusual insignia, a circle intersected by a vertical line, identical to the symbol used in early British research into electromagnetic propulsion. The photograph was never published, and no official record of the Brackenfield exists in convoy registries. The fate of the ships remains unconfirmed. No wreckage has been located despite multiple deep-sea searches. However, in Chapter 2, The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iceveil. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing inward, and with it came a reckoning of unfinished secrets. The files of Operation Iceveil were presumed lost, destroyed in wartime bombings, or sealed in one of the Admiralty's anonymous steel cabinets. But in 1947, a civil servant named Peter Ashcroft, an archivist for the War Records Office, found a mislabeled packet in a requisitions drawer marked Northern Freight Movements. Inside were 5 microfilm reels and a set of dispatch forms dated between January and March 1944. Each bore the same signature. Captain Reginald Harrow, commanding officer of HMS Valiant, last seen departing Murmansk. The microfilms contained fragments of coded naval traffic between Murmansk, Bletchley Park, and an entity referred to as Command Unit Borealis. This was not a known branch of the Royal Navy, nor did it appear in any Ministry of Defence chart. The terminology was clinical, detached. Phrases like stage initiation complete and thermal containment satisfactory at 73% appeared alongside references to cargo units. More curious still, each message included a line beginning with HALO, possibly a code name, perhaps a classification. Analysts decades later would remark that the structure of the code bore the hallmarks of scientific progress reports, not military communication. When Ashcroft attempted to escalate his discovery, his correspondence abruptly ceased. His widow later reported that 2 men claiming to be from the ministry collected the reels and documentation, issuing a signed receipt that never appeared in official records. Within 3 weeks, Ashcroft was transferred to the India office, and soon after disappeared during an inspection visit to Calcutta. His personnel file was closed without comment. It was not until the late 1950s that another clue surfaced. During NATO's Operation Cold Reach, designed to test Arctic communications, an American submarine, the USS Kearsarge, detected faint sonar returns near the coordinates matching the last known location of the Iceveil convoy. The data was archived under geologic irregularities, but later revisited by Commander Charles Meade, who concluded the reflections bore the angular symmetry of man-made hulls. The US Navy classified the finding under confidential polar acoustic research, but a memo between Meade and British naval liaison hinted at awareness from both sides. Meade's last communication in 1962 reads simply, "Your ice is not silent." In 1978, an investigative journalist named Harold Bennington, working for the Manchester Chronicle, pursued the story after receiving an anonymous envelope containing photocopied excerpts from the Ashcroft reels. The documents referred to thermodynamic instability and containment field pressure variances. Bennington's article, "The Convoy That Vanished Twice," was published in April 1979 and swiftly suppressed under the Defence Notice system. Weeks later, Bennington was found dead in his London flat of what was declared carbon monoxide, poisoning due to faulty ventilation. His editor received a call from the ministry requesting all related notes and negatives be surrendered. They were. None were ever returned, yet whispers continued to circulate in military circles. One retired engineer from the Admiralty's Department of Naval Construction, interviewed in 1985, recalled hearing of a device powered not by combustion but by reaction, something to do with magnetic compression. He claimed it had been tested aboard a modified merchant vessel named SS Mariner's Vale, which was assigned to the Iceveil convoy. According to him, the project's scientific oversight was under a Dr. Edward Glascott, a physicist once affiliated with the University of Cambridge's Cavendish Laboratory before disappearing from academic records in 1943. Glascott's last recorded lecture topic: the properties of induced cryogenic resonance in metallic fields. By 1990, fragments of Glascott's correspondence emerged through private collectors in Norway. One letter, dated December 1943 and addressed to an unknown Admiralty official, reads, "If the readings from the Norwegian sample hold, we may achieve sustained stabilization, but the temperature window is perilously narrow. Any deviation below -190 will collapse the field entirely. Whether the Norwegian sample referred to a material, an artifact, or a captured experiment remains unknown. The implications, however, suggested a technology both untested and dangerous, something volatile enough that a failed transfer might not leave wreckage, only disappearance." Satellite imaging in the early 2000s added another layer. In 2004, a joint British-Norwegian mapping mission recorded unusual sub-ice formations consistent with shipwreck outlines, arranged in a straight pattern over 6 kilometers. A thermal anomaly, colder than surrounding ice, emanated from the area. When the data was forwarded to the UK Hydrographic Office, researchers were informed that the coordinates corresponded to restricted waters. The anomaly was removed from subsequent public survey charts. There are, too, the human stories that refuse to die. Fishermen from Vardø tell of bright lights beneath the sea in winters when the sun does not rise. Soviet submariners claim to have detected ghost convoys moving silently on sonar. Returns that registered as steel ships but dissolved upon approach. And among the coastal villages of Murmansk, elders still speak of a night in 1944 when the horizon glowed faint blue for hours, as if dawn had broken early. In 2012, an academic paper circulated briefly on a secure NATO server titled Operation Iceveil, a reassessment of Arctic naval losses. It was withdrawn within days, but not before being archived by independent researchers. The paper cited a declassified 1954 internal memo from MI6, which stated, "Residual phenomena persist at zone 7135. Recommend continued surveillance. Potential hazard to navigation remains." No explanation was offered for what residual phenomena meant. The language, clinical and detached, hides a profound unease, the sense that whatever the British experimented with beneath the Arctic sky did not vanish harmlessly. And then there is the matter of sound. Acoustic readings captured during submarine transits through the Barents over the last decade still record low-frequency oscillations at intervals of precisely 14 minutes. Hydrophone technicians call them the pulses. The pattern is too regular for geological movement, yet too deep and faint to trace. When compared with early Cold War sonar logs, the waveform matches those recorded during Operation Cold Reach in 1958 at the exact same coordinates. It is as if the sea itself remembers. To this day, Operation Iceveil remains an official phantom, neither acknowledged nor denied by the British government. The Admiralty's archives maintain no listing for Convoy PQ-76A, and researchers who inquire receive polite deflections. Some argue it was a test gone catastrophically wrong. Others insist it was a deliberate burial, a way to hide something Britain could never allow into Soviet or American hands. Whatever the truth, the silence around Iceveil feels rehearsed, almost ritual. As one naval historian wrote in the margins of a redacted file, "There are graves in the sea that must remain unopened. Perhaps beneath the Barents ice, 10 ships still rest in ordered formation, entombed in a perfect cold that has preserved their secret for 80 years. Chapter 3. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iceveil. In 1998, a quiet request arrived at the British National Archives under the Freedom of Information Act. The applicant, Dr. Miles Cartwright, a historian specializing in Arctic maritime routes, requested access to files concerning convoy losses in the Murmansk-Spitsbergen corridor. February 1944. His request was denied, citing reasons of national security. That alone raised questions. Why, more than 50 years after the event, would a missing convoy still be classified? Cartwright persisted, uncovering indirect references through naval requisition ledgers and Ministry of Supply expense reports. One, dated January 12, 1944, authorized a payment for Arctic transportation of research material, approved by Section 12C, an entity with no known public record. The file was signed by Major R. Llewellyn, whose military career ended abruptly that same year after an unrecorded court-martial. Cartwright would later describe his research as like following a shadow that knows it's being watched. The trail led him to Oslo, where he interviewed an elderly Norwegian radio operator named Henrik Olsen, who had served at a coastal listening station in Vardø during the war. Olsen recalled intercepting fragmented British transmissions late on February 4, 1944. He couldn't decipher much, but remembered one phrase repeated 3 times. Phase 2 initiated. Then, minutes later, silence. When asked about the convoy, Olsen hesitated before adding, "They were running something through the ice. We could feel it on the signal bands. It was alive." Cartwright's notes from that interview, later recovered from his flat after his sudden death in 2001, contain only one other annotation beneath Olsen's quote. HALO, Heat Absorption Linear Oscillator. Around this time, a retired engineer from Rolls-Royce, Malcolm Dreyer, contacted Cartwright's widow. He claimed to have worked under contract to the Ministry of Supply in 1943, helping design non-combustion thermal converters for use in cryogenic environmental trials. Dreyer insisted that the converters were intended for remote field tests requiring extreme cold and electromagnetic isolation, conditions that precisely described the Arctic. When pressed for details, Dreyer only said, "It wasn't power we were testing, it was containment." His testimony was never formally recorded, and his papers were seized following his death in 2004. His house, curiously, was later purchased by a private defense subcontractor. The technical speculation surrounding Operation Iceveil grew more complex in the years that followed. Analysts suggested the British may have been experimenting with a prototype energy system derived from captured German experiments at Peenemünde. Some believed the device, perhaps installed aboard HMS Valiant or one of the merchant ships, was intended to create a sustained magnetic field capable of powering radar or propulsion systems through Arctic interference. Others posited something far less conventional, that Iceveil tested a form of deep-sea containment, perhaps tied to reports of an anomalous source recovered from a German weather base in Svalbard months earlier. The truth is buried under layers of obfuscation, a web of denials that seem rehearsed. By 2006, an independent maritime research team led by Professor Annika Hovland at Tromsø University began a sonar mapping project over the Barents seabed. Their equipment recorded a pattern of metallic signatures matching the hull dimensions of 10 vessels. Each appeared aligned in a nearly straight corridor, extending northeast toward the Novaya Zemlya Trench. But what alarmed Hovland most was the surrounding acoustic environment, temperature differentials, and a recurring low-frequency vibration at intervals of 14 minutes. She noted in her final report, "The seafloor vibrates like an engine running at idle." Within days, the project was abruptly terminated. Funding was withdrawn, and the official summary of her findings was redacted. Hovland resigned shortly after and relocated abroad, refusing further interviews. There is a particular file, DFE 3347, that appeared in the 2010 release of British Wartime Archives. Within it lies an unsigned memorandum referencing experimental energy devices en route to northern test sectors under Operation Iceveil. The memo concludes, "Field results inconclusive. Secondary resonance achieved. Loss attributed to uncontrolled oscillation." The phrasing is clinical, but those who study it understand what it implies. Something aboard those ships became unstable, catastrophic enough to erase the convoy completely. If accurate, the disappearance may not have been caused by weather or U-boats, but by the experiment itself, a chain reaction in sub-zero temperatures that consumed everything around it. One curious postscript appeared years later. In 2014, a Russian scientific expedition to the Barents reported a magnetic anomaly centered at 71°35°, the same coordinates as Iceveil's last signal. The anomaly was consistent, rhythmic, and persistent over several months, peaking at regular 14-minute intervals. Russian naval authorities dismissed it as a sensor malfunction, yet their own follow-up expedition was quietly cancelled. Satellite telemetry later showed military vessels patrolling the same sector for weeks. Historians like to think of the war as a closed chapter, its secrets dissolved by time. But the Iceveil file refuses to rest. Every decade or so, fragments of its story surface. A recovered cipher, a missing scientist, a sonar anomaly. Each time, the discovery vanishes under a new layer of classification. Perhaps as one former intelligence officer wrote in a private letter to his son, "The convoy did not sink, it was swallowed." That phrasing has haunted researchers since, especially those who study the Arctic's deep stratification zones, where cold water meets the magnetic flow of the Earth. It is said that in those depths, compasses fail and sound bends back upon itself, echoing forever. In 2018, an unmarked envelope arrived at a naval historian's office in Portsmouth. Inside was a single black and white photograph, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. 10 ships, icebound in formation, their decks empty and their masts coated in frost. On the reverse, typed in red ink, recovered film, Operation Iceveil, Zone 71, 30 Sime, Frame 22. The photograph has never been authenticated, but those who have seen it describe one detail that defies explanation. A faint halo of light surrounding the central ship, as though the ice itself glowed from within. Whatever the truth behind Operation Iceveil, it has become more than a missing convoy. It stands as a symbol of how deeply nations will bury their own experiments when knowledge outpaces morality. The sea keeps its secrets, but every so often it seems to breathe them back through the static of forgotten transmissions, through the mechanical hum beneath the ice. And perhaps, if one listens long enough to the Barents night, the faint echo that returns isn't merely the sound of water, but the slow heartbeat of something that never truly stopped. Chapter 4: The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iceveil. By the time the Cold War reached its height, Operation Iceveil had become a phantom whispered among intelligence circles, a code word for anything that disappeared without explanation. Officially, there was no record. Unofficially, every major intelligence agency possessed fragments. In 1965, the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology circulated an internal report titled Residual Energy Emissions, Arctic Sector 71 Garngran. The source, a cluster of recurring magnetic anomalies, was noted as consistent with a buried conductive mass of significant scale. Attached to the document was a hand-drawn map, labelled with British convoy routes from 1944. Across the chart, someone had written in pencil, Iceveil. The notation was never explained. In London, a parallel effort emerged. MI6 had quietly reopened a forgotten archive known as the Black Shelf, a locked section of the War Office basement holding materials too incomplete or too politically inconvenient for declassification. Among the reels retrieved was a single damaged film labelled PQ-76A Recon Copy 4. What the film revealed remains officially unknown, but a technician who viewed it before it was resealed described it years later to a journalist. You could see the ships just before the whiteout. Then, something flashes under the ice. It's like the ocean lit up from below, then went black again. His name was withheld, but his story matched others. Sailors, radio men, Arctic explorers, all of whom spoke of light under ice. At the same time, across the Iron Curtain, Soviet interest was rekindled. The GRU launched Operation Sever 3, a deep-sea retrieval project near Franz Josef Land. Memo later obtained by defectors in the 1990s recorded the recovery of metallic structures of foreign origin, consistent with wartime manufacture, exhibiting unexplained magnetization. These structures were transported to Arkhangelsk and sealed within a restricted research site. When queried by British diplomats years later, the Soviets dismissed the matter as routine Arctic salvage. But an intercepted KGB communication, now part of the Mitrukhin archive, contained a line more telling. Residual power signatures persist, containment uncertain. The mystery of what kind of power had been aboard the Iceveil convoy deepened. Declassified Admiralty blueprints from the 1940s, discovered in a private collection, describe an experimental vessel retrofitted with reinforced bulkheads and non-standard coolant conduits, technology unnecessary for ammunition or general cargo. Some researchers linked this to the Ministry of Supply's covert research branch at Orford Ness, where electromagnetic propulsion and cryogenic stability experiments were rumoured to have been conducted in secret collaboration with physicists evacuated from occupied Europe. The blueprints bore the signature E. Glascott. His handwriting matched the physicist long associated with the project's theoretical core. It was Glascott's notes, eventually leaked through an anonymous intermediary, that offered the most unsettling clues. One entry reads, Phase 2 will verify stability under field conditions. The polar medium provides isolation. Should the oscillator breach threshold, event radius unpredictable. In plain language, Glascott anticipated instability, the possibility that their machine might not merely fail, but alter its surrounding environment. In another entry, he wrote, Containment is temporal, not physical. Once resonance is achieved, geography becomes secondary. Historians would argue over his meaning for decades, but the idea that containment is temporal led to a chilling hypothesis. Perhaps the convoy had not sunk, but shifted, displaced in ways that defied conventional explanation. Through the 1980s and 1990s, joint expeditions repeatedly sought to locate the Iceveil wrecks. Each time data was collected and quietly classified. One such mission, funded under NATO's Polar Transition Program, deployed magnetometers across the Barents Shelf. The resulting graphs showed a symmetrical waveform beneath the ice, repeating every 14 minutes with mathematical precision. When technicians overlaid the data against old convoy coordinates, the peaks aligned exactly with the last recorded positions of the lost ships. Attempts to replicate the readings elsewhere failed. The pattern was unique to one location, as though something beneath the sea still pulsed, regulated, rhythmic, alive. By 2010, researchers at the Norwegian Polar Institute obtained new data using sub-ice radar tomography. The scans revealed faint outlines of metallic objects beneath layers of glacial accretion, suggesting preservation rather than destruction. However, what struck the analysts most was the thermal reading. Pockets of temperature significantly lower than ambient seawater. Unnaturally cold, as if something continued to absorb heat long after its creation. In other words, the convoy was not merely frozen, it was actively freezing its surroundings. The government of Norway abruptly suspended the research, citing unresolved jurisdictional issues. Funding was withdrawn overnight. There are human threads that add flesh to these cold facts. One of the last living Arctic convoy veterans, Lieutenant Harold Blythe, gave an interview to the BBC in 2013. When asked if he had ever heard of Operation Iceveil, he paused for several seconds before replying, "We all heard about it. They told us it never happened." He went on to describe rumours among sailors, whispers of a convoy carrying a device that could silence the sea. When the interviewer pressed him, Blythe simply said, "It worked too well," and refused to elaborate further. He died 2 months later. Among historians, there remains a sense that the full story sits on the edge of discovery, awaiting a declassification that will never come. Files still marked secret under review occasionally appear in catalogue indexes, only to vanish days later. Naval intelligence officers, when questioned, respond with polite dismissal, but a growing number of scientists quietly study the Barents anomaly, seeking rational answers for an irrational event. Some suggest geothermal activity, others blame magnetic inversion. Yet none can explain why the region maintains an artificial temperature profile decades after the supposed sinking of a handful of ships. In the absence of confirmation, myth has filled the vacuum. Divers speak of strange auroras flickering beneath the ice, of static humming in their communication lines, of compasses spinning without cause. They describe hearing faint mechanical sounds, like turbines running deep below, impossible at those depths. It is said that at certain hours, if one lowers a hydrophone into the sea near 71 Guanin, a steady pulse answers, faint but unmistakable. It comes every 14 minutes, unwavering since 1944. The technicians who have heard it call it the heartbeat of Iceveil. If Operation Iceveil began as a test of secret technology, it ended as something far larger, a vanishing so perfect it rewrote official history. For every file uncovered, 2 more vanish. For every voice that speaks, another is silenced by secrecy or death. The war ended long ago, yet its ghosts still hum beneath the Arctic ice. What began as a convoy has become an echo, repeating through the decades, a reminder that not all battles leave debris, and not all victories are meant to be known. Chapter 5. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iceveil. There are few records left that mention Operation Iceveil by name, and even fewer people willing to speak of it. Yet scattered among classified archives, lost diaries, and censored research notes, a fractured narrative persists, one that stretches from wartime desperation to the uneasy silence of the present. What little can be pieced together suggests a single through line. Iceveil was not a conventional convoy. It was a transport mission for a device so sensitive, so potentially destabilizing, that its erasure became a matter of state survival. In 1943, Allied intelligence reports indicated that Germany's Advanced Weapons Division at Peenemünde was experimenting with energetic matter, stabilization, a theory to harness extreme cold and electromagnetic resonance to power weaponized flight or communication systems. When the facility was bombed in August that year, a small number of German scientists were captured by British commandos operating under Special Operations Executive Unit X. According to one partially declassified memo from the Foreign Office, dated October 1943, these scientists were placed under the custody of the Ministry of Supply's Section 12C, under the leadership of physicist Dr. Edward Glascott. Their combined research, codenamed Project Hadrian, became the seed of Operation Iceveil. The technology's core principle appeared to involve creating a self-sustaining magnetic containment field at sub-zero temperatures, something Glascott theorized could enable stable energy generation or radar cloaking. Test logs later referenced cryogenic resonance chambers and oscillatory field maintenance under thermal suppression. Whatever it was, the system required environmental conditions impossible to achieve anywhere but the Arctic. Hence Iceveil. On February 3, 1944, the fleet left Murmansk carrying Glascott, his staff, and 10 sealed containers of unknown equipment. The destroyers, HMS Valiant and Cotswold, provided escort. Phase 1, transit. Phase 2, field activation. For 72 hours, all communication followed routine procedure. Then, radio silence. The final message, intercepted by both Allied and Soviet channels, read, Phase 2 initiated. Containment nominal. After that, nothing. British command scrambled search operations, but ice coverage and weather blocked all access. Soviet authorities were told the convoy was lost to enemy submarines. But no U-boat patrol logs, German or otherwise, show any encounter in that region during that period. The incident was quietly buried, its participants reassigned, its designation erased from records. Fast forward nearly 20 years. In 1963, an internal Admiralty memo surfaced, marked ultra-restricted NID. It referenced unresolved field residue in the Barents sector, warning of intermittent radio interference patterns consistent with sustained oscillation. Analysts recognized the 14-minute pulse, identical to what would later be recorded by NATO acoustic sensors. One line, redacted but still legible in part, read, HALO field remains active. Recommend indefinite observation. That same year, MI6 instructed the Hydrographic Office to cease mapping of that sector. Navigation charts were quietly redrawn. Parallel Soviet investigations reached similar conclusions. GRU deep-water operations near Novaya Zemlya recorded metallic formations embedded in ice shelf strata, emitting unexplained magnetization. Soviet researchers hypothesized a long-term thermodynamic reaction, the product of an experimental reactor still operating under extreme conditions. By 1970, the area was designated a non-navigable hazard zone. Satellite imagery was classified. Even decades later, Russian naval databases continue to flag the coordinates with a single notation: do not disturb. If the scientific side of Iceveil can be traced, the human one remains more elusive. A surviving letter from Glascott's assistant, Eleanor Chalmers, found among her estate papers, paints a vivid picture of growing unease aboard the convoy. Dated February 2, 1944, just one day before departure, it reads, "The system hums even when powered down. Dr. G insists it's residual magnetics, but the sound makes the metal sweat. I fear we are building something that cannot be unbuilt." The letter ends abruptly. If we succeed, it will not belong to us. It was never mailed. In 1997, British divers participating in a commercial expedition off Franz Josef Land discovered fragments of ship plating embossed with the Royal Navy's crown insignia. Forensic analysis confirmed the alloy's origin in the early 1940s. But the metal exhibited unusual magnetization, repelling compass needles even at rest. Within months, the recovered samples were confiscated by government contractors under the guise of environmental regulation. The divers, once vocal, fell silent. One later told a colleague, "When they came for the pieces, they already knew exactly where we found them. As time passes, more anomalies surface. Under ice sonar continues to pick up symmetrical geometric echoes at the supposed Iceveil coordinates. These structures appear too orderly for natural formations and too vast to be individual wrecks. Meanwhile, instruments record thermal depressions extending hundreds of meters below the ice, pockets of intense cold that defy oceanographic logic. The Barents, they say, is still colder at its heart than physics allows. And through all of it, one constant remains. The pulse, 14 minutes, unwavering since 1944. Every hydrophone, every acoustic sweep, every classified submarine log repeats the same rhythm. Some call it mechanical. Others believe it's something residual, a feedback loop left behind by the experiment's failure. Whatever it is, it has outlived every sailor, every scientist, every administrator who once swore it didn't exist. There is one final note worth mentioning. In 2019, a private satellite operator released declassified thermal scans of the Barents region. Hidden in the data, amateur analysts discovered a faint circular outline nearly 5 kilometers wide, centered precisely at Iceveil's last coordinates. Within it, 10 faint, evenly spaced signatures, the shape of a convoy. Shortly after publication, the dataset was removed. The company cited data corruption. Yet those who downloaded it before deletion insist the pattern was unmistakable. Operation Iceveil remains one of history's most deliberate silences. Its truth lies somewhere between classified science and the abyss. Perhaps Glascot's containment field did not fail, but succeeded in ways no one could have predicted. Perhaps the convoy did not sink. It was preserved, suspended in its own engineered isolation, still humming after all these years. The Arctic keeps its secrets well, but the hum persists, and if one listens long enough, it almost sounds like the sea itself breathing, steady, patient, waiting for someone to finally unseal what Britain buried beneath the ice. For nearly a century, the Arctic has guarded the silence of Operation Iceveil. Each attempt to uncover the truth ends in missing files, sealed archives, or sudden deaths. What remains are fragments, coded telegrams, flickering sonar readings, and the endless hum beneath the Barents Sea. Whether the convoy sank, shifted, or was deliberately entombed, the evidence points to something that was never meant to be found. The pulse still echoes every 14 minutes, unchanged since 1944. Somewhere beneath that frozen horizon, 10 ships still sleep in perfect formation, preserving a secret colder than the sea itself. And perhaps waiting for the world to remember them.